My fellow Americans, Charlie Kirk of Turning Point USA has uncovered a vicious conspiracy by presumptive Democratic nominee Kamala Harris to utilize Marxist incantations in order to bewitch the masses and steal your freedoms. Please be sure to locate your pocket constitutions and nearest framed portrait of Senator Joseph McCarthy and steel yourselves for this full-throated spiritual and socioeconomic assault.
Vice President Harris will say repeatedly, what is the quote? The quote is that we can see what can be unburdened by what has been. Is that word salad or Marxism? It's Marxism. That is, in fact, not at all word salad. It is a Marxist, as I said on Twitter the other day and got mocked relentlessly by the media for this, I said it's a Marxist incantation, as a matter of fact. It's like a spell.
Wait, that's it? What can be unburdened by what has been? I was assured that Marx and Lucifer would be making an appearance somewhere here. Better to reign in the USSR than serve in the USA or something like that. I don't know. You might have thought that we were over Red Scares and satanic panics by now, but I guess everything old is new again, and the Marxist luciferian line is apparently what some prominent conservatives are going with as an attack on Kamala Harris. Now, if this was just some throwaway line, I'd probably just point and laugh at this, I think, pretty intrinsically funny idea that saying what can be unburdened by what has been is an evil Marxist spell. But surprisingly, the guy that seems to have actually originated this idea, an author named James Lindsay, really doubles down and lays out the case for us to examine. So, in the spirit of matching this Herculean effort, I'm about to treat this with way more seriousness than it probably deserves. Lindsay has 500,000 followers on X, and if you're familiar with him, it's likely from the Grievance Studies affair back in 2018, which was all about testing the academic rigor of the social sciences by submitting ridiculous and otherwise bogus articles to journals and seeing if they would get accepted. With all that in mind, let's take a look. Now, there's a whole thread involved here, and I encourage you to read it yourself because it's kind of like the text version of looking through a kaleidoscope. But I'll read some sections and summarize others just for the sake of not forcing you to listen to me read at you for 5 minutes. Lindsay begins by telling us that Kamala Harris saying what can be unburdened by what has been is occult, Marxist, and Luciferian. If you're unfamiliar with Harris's what can be line, she does say it a lot. Here's a compilation. It's kind of funny, actually.
What can be unburdened by what has been?
What can be unburdened by what has been?
What can be unburdened by what has been?
So before we get into the occult Marxism allegations, let's consider why Kamala Harris might be repeating this line a lot. And it actually does have to do with another esoteric practice that might be unfamiliar to some people called a stump speech. The term stump speech refers to basically a kind of canned speech given by politicians over and over again in different places. It works kind of like how stand-up comedians might change small things about their delivery from night to night, but generally aren't coming up with whole new routines for every stop on the tour. Or bands with a lot of songs might change the set list a little every night, but they know that the fans are coming to hear the hits. Politicians basically work the exact same way, and while the stump speech may have become somewhat of a lost art over the last 8 years due to having one president who doesn't really give speeches so much as ramble and crack jokes for 45 minutes, and then another president who just isn't really very good at public speaking generally, it shouldn't come as a surprise, much less trigger the "she must be uttering magic words" alarm when you hear a politician throw in a random feel-good piece of pablum in order to get heads nodding. Lindsay grants us the grace of allowing us to ignore Harris's hand gestures when speaking this incantation, but then tells us we actually shouldn't because it's actually an intentional imitation of the goat-headed demon Baphomet. This really reminds me of those Illuminati conspiracy theory videos from like 10 years ago where people would try and say that celebrities and rich and powerful people were leaving clues all over the place that the Illuminati actually controlled the world. This is really all I have to say about this piece. It's just really good to see that the Luciferian part of this argument is on such strong ground as we continue. Lindsay goes on to start citing Marx's work and draws a comparison between the Communist Manifesto and Harris's line. His idea is that if you take the phrase, "the history of all hitherto existing society is the history of class struggles," you can say that this is equivalent to saying what has been. And since Marxism attempts to create a society free of class struggle, that would be the what can be or unburdened idea. This goes on for a while, and Lindsay talks some more about Marx's ideas and makes more analogies between pieces of what he said in either what can be or what has been. One point I would like to briefly clarify here is that Lindsay quotes Marx using the term exoteric, and I want to make clear exoteric and esoteric do not mean the same thing. It's sort of unclear if that's what he's saying, but at the very least, I think it's written in a way where someone might be confused. To be clear, exoteric is basically the opposite of esoteric. Lindsay takes a brief aside to go after various social science doctrines he has a problem with before asserting that Lucifer wanted to see what can be unburdened by what has been when he revolted against God. This is the other piece of the Satan connection. After this, the thread really loses its own plot, I think. There's no more references to Gnostic knowledge or Luciferian rituals after this, and the only communist we hear about after this point is Pol Pot. And it just kind of devolves into your standard New World Order, World Economic Forum conspiracism mixed in with some points about the French Revolution and Oliver Cromwell. His other thread that I found he wrote about this is much shorter, pretty much only notable for casting the same aspersions at the other Kamala Harris line everyone loves to joke about.
You think you just fell out of a coconut tree? You exist in the context of all in which you live and what came before you.
So now that we've seen all the evidence, now that it's been laid before us, all cards on the table, is what can be unburdened by what has been a Luciferian Marxist incantation? No, obviously not. For all of his Marx citations, I guess Lindsay missed the parts about Marx not exactly being the ally of religion or superstition. For all his appeals to the esoteric and the Luciferian, he seems unaware that Anton LaVey, the guy that basically founded organized Satanism, described it as Ayn Rand's philosophy with ceremony and ritual added. For those of you that don't know, Ayn Rand was not exactly a fan of Marx, to put it lightly. Now, I'll grant we can death of the author these guys that created Marxism and Satanism if we want, and just interpret these ideologies to mean whatever we want them to mean in order to, create an interesting Twitter thread. But that seems pretty wishy-washy and postmodern for a guy whose Twitter banner says, "Pursuing the light of objective truth in subjective darkness." As well, it's important to point out that Marx and Lucifer do not have some sort of duopoly on the idea of making a break with the past and doing something new. It may surprise you to learn that deciding to make a break with the past and do something new has been somewhat of a theme throughout history, and it's been a theme engaged with by people of all religions and economic doctrines. Let's take a look at one example. We have it in our power to begin the world over again. A situation similar to the present hath not happened since the days of Noah until now. The birthday of a new world is at hand, and a race of men, perhaps as numerous as all Europe contains, are to receive their portion of freedom from the events of a few months. The reflection is awful, and in this point of view, how trifling, how ridiculous do the little paltry cavillings of a few weak or interested men appear when weighed against the business of a world. I saw at least one mystical Gnostic reference in there, and the business of the whole world, begin the world over again, that sounds like some globalist commie nonsense to me. That must be Lenin or Bakunin or Marx or somebody, right? Actually, it was Thomas Paine, American founding father. You can't just say something is Marxist or satanic or whatever because you think it sounds scary. Marxism in particular isn't a political swear word. It's a real existing ideology. You can define it. It's not a mystical set of vibes you suddenly discover in politicians that compare one thing to another thing or say that we should do better in the future than we have done in the past. By calling totally normal things Marxist, all you're going to do is convince normal people that Marxism is totally normal. I'm not a Marxist, so please do not do this. Please stop. It's so much easier to argue with what Marxism actually is, with its real existing flaws, than with an amorphous blob of vibes. Do we remember what happened with the word socialism? Conservatives called every government program or piece of spending socialist for half a century. This worked for a while. They were able to scare people for a while, but it also muddled the definition of socialism so much that now you have people who, for all intents and purposes, are regular run-of-the-mill liberals who've been negatively polarized so much into thinking that they're actually socialists, not because they care about who owns the means of production, but because you've told them that being for student debt relief makes them socialists. Not only is it not correct, it's just awful strategy from a political perspective for people that aren't Marxists to describe Marxism in a clearly wrong way that makes it seem like the most normal, basic thing ever. One last thing, on the chance that this whole idea wasn't some appeal to archetypes and universal truths and such that you see some conservatives do occasionally, which it very well may have been, or maybe just to clear things up for any of the people that replied to this post and seem to actually believe that there is literally such a thing as a Marxist luciferian incantation, like an actual magic spell that Kamala Harris is trying to cast. Grow up. That's just not a real thing. Allow me to put your mind at ease. There is no such thing as a satanic Marxist spell that you can cast, no matter how creepy statues of Baphomet look, or no matter how many New World Order conspiracy theory videos that you've watched. Kamala Harris is not attempting to, nor is it possible to summon Beelzebub, and if she could, I promise you that the Lord of the Flies is not going to be quizzing you about dialectical materialism. All right, that was fun, wasn't it? Thanks for bearing with me on this one. My name's Ryan. Thanks so much for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you want. Leave a comment telling me your favorite Marxist Luciferian incantation. See you next time.